It was mid-September 2017. I had just turned 33 a few months before. I worked as a delivery driver for a local hardware supply company in southern Idaho, and back then, I used to take a lot of solo camping trips to clear my head. I didn't have many close friends, no kids, no partner. Just me and my time off. There was something comforting in the quiet of the woods, especially when I picked remote spots far from other people. I liked hearing nothing but the wind pushing through the pine trees, the crackle of a campfire, or the slow steps of deer walking past my tent at night. This trip was meant to be one of those peaceful resets. I had found this old forest access road on a topographic map that led out past Salmon, Idaho, and wound deep into the Bitterroot range. The road didn't even have a name. It was just a dirt path, narrow and uneven, littered with loose rocks and washed out in a few spots. I'd marked a clearing on the map that looked flat and wide enough to set up a tent, near a little stream about 8 miles down the trail. The area was surrounded by thick pine forest and hugged up close to the western edge of a steep ridge. No campsites, no trail signs, no people. Just raw forest. I drove out in my old Chevy Silverado on a Thursday morning. The weather was starting to cool down that time of year, but the forecast said dry days and clear skies, maybe down to the high 30s at night. Perfect. I loaded up the truck with my tent, a cooler with 2 days worth of food, plenty of water, and the usual gear: fire starter, hatchet, camp stove, first aid, bear spray, and my Ruger handgun, which I always brought just in case. Not for animals so much, but more because you never know who's out in the woods. It's not always animals you have to be careful about. I made the turnoff onto the forest road just after lunch. It was rough going in the truck. Lots of bouncing, bottoming out in a few places, and 1 or 2 creek crossings that made me question whether I'd be able to get back up the way I came. But I made it. About 90 minutes later, I reached the clearing. It was better than I expected. Wide enough for a truck and tent, a little grassy in the middle, but not too uneven. A fire ring of stones someone had built maybe a few seasons ago was still there, half full of ash and charred wood. The stream ran just past a thin row of trees about 20 feet from the clearing and curved toward the east. The sun cut through the pine canopy just enough to keep the ground warm. I set up the tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and got everything ready for 2 nights. The first day was what I'd hoped for, peaceful. I cooked a quick dinner on my camp stove, some sausages and canned beans, and ate sitting on the tailgate of my truck, listening to the wind. I walked down the stream a little ways as the sun dipped behind the trees. The light turned golden, and I saw no signs of anyone.
No boat prints, no trash.
No broken branches from recent traffic. Just nature. That night, I sat by the fire until close to 10, then crawled into my tent and slept well. I woke up just once around 2 a.m. when I heard something moving nearby, maybe 30 feet from the tent. It was quiet, slow, and I could tell it was heavy, but I figured it was probably a deer or elk. I reached for my handgun and waited, listening, but whatever it was moved on after a minute or 2. The silence came back, and I drifted off again. The second day started with a thick layer of fog rolling over the ridge. I made coffee over the fire and watched it lift slowly through the trees. I decided to do some hiking and exploring around the ridge to the north. I took my day pack, water, knife, bear spray, and a bit of food, and headed out around 9 a.m. The forest up that way was thick, steep in places with a lot of loose rocks and fallen branches. I followed a game trail that ran parallel to the ridge and climbed for maybe an hour before I came to a flat spot with a decent view. You could see the valley stretch out below and the stream glittering faintly through the trees back near camp. I stayed there a while, eating a granola bar, catching my breath, and just taking in the silence. That's when I noticed something odd. It was hard to tell at first. Just a flicker of something through the trees about a few hundred feet down the slope. It wasn't an animal. I've spent enough time in the woods to tell the difference. It was movement but low to the ground. like someone crouching. The figure didn't stand up. It didn't make any sounds. It just moved slowly through the brush and vanished into a patch of dark trees. I stared at the spot for a long time, not blinking. I listened hard. Nothing.
No crunching, no footsteps, no briefing.
Eventually, I chalked it up to my eyes playing tricks on me. Shadows or an animal moving just right. Still, it left me feeling off. I turned back toward camp earlier than I had planned. When I got back, nothing seemed disturbed. My gear was all there, my food untouched, my truck fine. I made lunch, then sat by the stream, trying to shake that uneasiness. I convinced myself it was nothing. I hadn't seen any vehicles or signs of people for over 24 hours. The clearing was still as quiet and calm as when I'd arrived. But that night, something changed. Around 1 a.m., I woke up suddenly. Not to a sound, not at first, but to a feeling, like someone was watching me. It was that old primal instinct. I sat up in my sleeping bag and held my breath. The woods were silent. No wind, no bugs, nothing. I listened for a full minute before I heard it. A soft, deliberate footstep. It came from the direction of the trees near the stream. Then another, crunching lightly on dry leaves. I reached slowly for my handgun and stayed quiet. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't unzip the tent or move too much. I just sat still and listened. More footsteps. Not fast. Careful. Slow. Getting closer. Then silence again. I stayed there for what felt like 20 minutes. I didn't hear anything else. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I got up and stepped outside the tent. The forest looked normal. The fire ring was undisturbed, but the dew was heavy and the leaves near the stream were scuffed. Fresh boot prints. Someone had walked right past my camp during the night, maybe even stopped. I looked around for any other signs. Nothing. No gear, no garbage, no signs of camping. Whoever it was didn't light a fire or stay nearby, just passed through or watched. I packed up my camp quicker than usual, loaded everything back in the truck and got ready to leave. But as I turned the ignition, the engine sputtered. Then nothing. I tried again. Click. Third time. Caught, but the dash lights flickered and it sounded rough. Something was off. I popped the hood and checked the battery cables. Everything looked fine. Oil and coolant levels were normal. No signs of a leak. I decided to drive out before anything else went wrong. The truck limped down the trail, sluggish. I had to keep the RPMs up just to keep it from stalling. When I got to a spot where I had to cross a shallow creek again, I hit the gas and barely made it through. At one point, maybe 2 miles from the main road, I stopped to let the engine cool. I got out, walked around, and that's when I noticed something wedged under the rear bumper. A strip of thin wire, looped and twisted, tied to a stick that had broken off. I didn't put it there. It looked like someone had rigged something to drag under the truck, maybe to snag or rip something loose. I checked the underside. Nothing obvious, but the feeling in my gut turned heavy. That wire wasn't there before. It wasn't random. Someone had been near my truck, maybe even messed with it during the night. I drove the rest of the way out and didn't stop until I reached a gas station outside Salmon. I popped the hood again, and a guy at the next pump came over and asked if I needed a hand. I told him the engine was acting up. He looked it over and pointed out something I missed. A few wire connections to the fuse box were loose, not ripped or corroded, but like they'd been gently pulled apart and tucked back in. Not enough to kill the truck, but enough to cause trouble. It hit me hard then. Someone had been trying to strand me out there, on purpose. And the worst part? They hadn't taken anything. Not my cooler, not my gear, not even my gas can. They didn't want my stuff. They just wanted me stuck. I left town that day and never went back to that side of the Bitterroots. I changed my routine too. I don't camp alone anymore, not deep in the woods, not without checking in with someone first. I installed a dash camera, a tracker, and always park in places with clear exits. I don't know who it was, what they wanted, or how long they had been watching me. Maybe just that night, maybe longer. But I do know this: they knew how to move quietly, how to hide, how to mess with a truck without breaking it, and how to vanish without a trace. That trip was supposed to clear my head. Instead, it reminded me that the scariest things out there aren't bears, or storms, or ghosts. It's people. People who don't say a word. People who just watch. It was the fall of 2018 when I decided to take a solo camping trip out west. I was 33 then, living in Omaha, working for a small contracting company, and I'd been grinding through a streak of 10-hour days, 6 days a week, for almost 3 months straight. I was tired, mentally cooked. My boss had finally given me a week off, so I packed up my Tacoma and left town. I wanted somewhere dry, open, and quiet. I didn't want trees. I didn't want lakes. I didn't want people. I wanted space, empty space. So I picked a place called Comb Ridge, out near the Utah-Arizona border. I'd read about it years ago in a geology magazine. Massive sandstone fins that stretch like the spine of some buried beast across the desert floor. Not many people go out there, not even tourists. The nearest town, Bluff, is barely more than a gas station and a few worn-down buildings. I drove straight through Colorado, slept once in the truck near a rest stop, and got to Bluff late in the afternoon 2 days later. I filled up the tank, grabbed water, some gas station snacks, and headed out west on a dusty road that ran parallel to the ridge. No real trail markers, just faint tire ruts in the dirt and sunburned shrubs. I followed the road for about 10 miles until I found a spot where the rocks opened up and I could park near a shallow wash. I set up my little ground tent maybe 100 feet from the truck, near the base of one of the red fins. There were no trees, no cover, just dirt, stone, and the whisper of wind against rock. Exactly what I wanted. That first night was uneventful. I cooked a can of chili over a butane stove, sat in my folding chair, and watched the stars until the cold started biting through my hoodie. No sounds but the wind and the occasional shifting of sand. Nothing unnatural, nothing strange. The second day, I spent most of it hiking along the base of the ridge. There were old cliff dwellings built into the rock walls, remnants from the ancestral Puebloans. Some of the structures were still intact, tucked deep into the alcoves where the rain never reached. I didn't touch anything, just looked. There were faint handprints painted in red on the stone, and narrow footpaths worn smooth by centuries of use. It was haunting and beautiful in the way that only empty places can be. That night, I cooked again, this time beans and rice with a little hot sauce. I ate slowly, watching the sun bleed out behind the fins, and then crawled into my sleeping bag around 9. The desert gets cold after sundown. My tent flapped lightly in the breeze, and I fell asleep to the sound of dry leaves and sand moving across the floor. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly. I don't know what pulled me out of sleep, but my eyes were wide open and my ears were straining before I even knew what I was doing. The wind had stopped, completely. No flap,
No whistle.
nothing, just a weird, heavy stillness. At first, I thought it might have been an animal, maybe a coyote, maybe a deer, something that had wandered close to camp. But then I heard the crunch, not a quick scuffle, not a bird hopping around. It was a slow, deliberate footstep, heavy enough to register. Crunch, then another, then it stopped. I didn't move. I just lay there, eyes open, staring at the nylon above my head. The tent has mesh windows on both sides, and the moon was bright enough that I could see shadows moving outside. At first, I thought it was just the shadow of the fins shifting under the moonlight. But then I saw something pass by the tent, upright, on 2 legs. It didn't make sense. There's nobody out there. I was miles off any marked trail, on a rough, nearly invisible road, and I hadn't seen a single soul for more than a day. I should have heard a vehicle if someone had come in, but I hadn't. And this person was walking slow, like they didn't care if they were heard. I didn't even breathe. I just lay there, trying to keep my heartbeat from thudding through the nylon. The shadow stopped near the foot of the tent. I saw it clearly through the mesh. Long legs, a slight hunch, arms hanging. Couldn't see a face, just the shape. It stood there for maybe 30 seconds, then turned and walked back toward the wash. I heard the crunch of steps fade away until it was gone. I stayed awake until morning. When the sun came up, I unzipped the tent and walked the area. No prints, nothing fresh. The ground was hard-packed and crusty, not great for tracking, but still, no tire marks, no boots, nothing. I chalked it up to a dream. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing in that half-sleep state people get when they camp alone. Still, I kept my knife on me the rest of the day. Didn't hike far. That night, I locked the doors of the truck and slept inside it. Not because I was scared exactly, just unsettled. The cab felt safer. The windows offered some visibility. The tent just felt too exposed. At around the same time, close to 2:30 again, I heard movement. This time it came from behind the truck. I sat up quietly and stayed low, trying to peek over the steering wheel without being seen. The moon was bright again, and I could see the wash clearly, the tent 30 feet away, the rocks behind me rising like broken teeth. Then I saw it again, the figure, standing on the far side of the wash, facing the truck, not moving, just standing, watching. I strained my eyes. It looked like a man, but too thin, like long-limbed and stiff, almost like something was wrong with the way it held itself. And then it did something I still can't explain. Crouched, slow, mechanical, like someone doing it for the first time, and then crawled forward on all fours. It moved like it didn't know how. Its elbows jutted out too far. The knees dragged weirdly, like someone trying to act like an animal but doing it badly. It moved halfway across the wash, then stopped. I didn't move. I barely breathed. After maybe 5 minutes, it stood back up, awkward and shaky, and turned back toward the ridge. Then it was gone. That time, I knew I wasn't dreaming. I didn't sleep at all that night. At first light, I packed the tent, threw everything into the bed of the truck, and started driving out. But here's the thing. When I got to where the dirt road should have reconnected to the highway, it wasn't there. I drove the ruts backward and forward, looking for the turnoff. I had my GPS, but the signal was cutting in and out, and the map just showed a blank expanse. No lines, no roads, just desert. Eventually, I found a dry creek bed that led north and followed it, bouncing hard over rocks, scraping the undercarriage until I hit pavement again. I didn't stop in Bluff. I didn't stop anywhere. I drove all the way to Albuquerque before I pulled into a motel and slept for a full 12 hours. Now here's where it gets worse. Back in Omaha a couple weeks later, I was going through photos on my phone. I hadn't taken many, just a few shots of the ridge, some old ruins, the sunset on the first night. Then I found one I didn't take. It was a picture of my tent. Night, from maybe 30 feet away. Flash off, slightly blurry, like it was taken in a hurry. And in the bottom corner of the frame, just barely, was the shape of a hand. Pale, too long, half-cropped. I deleted it immediately. I don't know why. Felt wrong having it on my phone. I didn't tell anyone. I just pushed the whole trip out of my mind and tried to forget it. For months after, though, I had this feeling that something was still around. Not watching me exactly, but near. I started sleeping with my bedroom light on. I kept the curtains closed. I got a security camera for my front door, even though I lived in a decent neighborhood. But nothing ever happened again.
No sightings.
No footsteps. Nothing. The sense faded eventually. Life moved on. Now, years later, I've told myself it was probably just a person. Some hermit. Maybe someone high. Maybe someone messing with me. But that crawling, that shape, that picture I didn't take, it still bothers me. I've been camping since, but never alone. Never in the desert. And never west of Colorado. What scares me most isn't what I saw. It's that someone was out there, walking around in the middle of the night, miles from anything, pretending to be something they weren't. And they weren't pretending for me. They were practicing. I was 31 in the summer of 2017, working in logistics in Manchester, and I remember needing to get away more than anything else. I had this growing pressure in my chest that made it hard to sleep, and for some reason, I started thinking more and more about the Norfolk countryside. I used to go there as a kid with my uncle, and I remembered the quiet, the wind moving through the fields, the soft chirp of insects at night. I craved silence. So I booked a week off work, loaded up my old hatchback with some gear, and decided to go camping on my own for a few days. It wasn't one of those organized sites. I picked a spot I remembered from childhood, a wooded area near Holt, surrounded by farmland and only accessible by narrow, winding roads. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I'd be. I just said Norfolk. I wanted to disconnect. No emails, no phone calls, no people. The drive took longer than expected. I didn't use sat-nav, just paper maps and my memory. By the time I reached the gravel pull-in beside a hedge-lined field, it was already late afternoon. The trees had grown a lot since I last saw them, and I had to hike deeper in than I remembered to find a flat, dry clearing. There were signs others had camped there at some point. Ashes from an old fire, a rusted beer can half buried in the dirt, but it looked abandoned. That's what I wanted. I set up the tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and walked a short loop before the light faded. The forest felt safe in the daylight. Thin trunks, mostly ash and birch, let enough light through that I never felt boxed in. But I made note of landmarks anyway. An uprooted tree, a mossy rock, a rotted wooden fence buried halfway into the undergrowth, so I wouldn't get lost. I cooked some beans on a small stove, sat with my back against the tree, and listened to the stillness. The occasional rustle of something in the undergrowth, the soft hum of insects. I didn't even realize how fast night fell. When I turned off my headlamp, the dark was full and total. It wasn't scary, just isolating. The kind of darkness that made you aware of every sound, every twig snapping in the distance, every leaf shifting. But I was calm. I fell asleep easily that night. The second day passed quietly. I explored a bit, found an old path that curved toward a dry stone wall separating the woods from a wheat field. I didn't see a single person. The nearest road was a good mile off, and even that was barely used. I boiled water from a small stream using iodine tablets and spent most of the day walking, napping, or sitting still. It was what I'd needed, until the second night. I woke up around 1 a.m. I didn't know why. It wasn't a noise exactly, more a shift in pressure, like the woods had gotten heavier. I listened for a few minutes and almost convinced myself it was nothing when I heard the crunch. It wasn't a small animal. It was the distinct, slow compression of a heavy footstep on dry forest ground. I didn't move. I just lay still, barely breathing. Another crunch, and another, slow, deliberate, not circling, closer. I couldn't tell how close. The sound warped in the dark, but they stopped eventually. No sound after that. I stayed awake until the sun came up, too afraid to unzip the tent flap. When daylight finally came, I stepped out and looked around. Nothing.
No boat prints.
No sign anyone had been there. I told myself it was a deer, a large one. Maybe it wandered close to the tent. I'd seen that before in the Lake District. I even laughed at myself. The fear you feel at night vanishes with the sun. Still, I didn't go too far that day. I stayed within a few hundred feet of camp, just in case. The third night, I brought a long tent peg with me inside the sleeping bag. Not much of a weapon, but it was something solid, metal with a pointed end. It made me feel better. I didn't fall asleep easily that time. I kept jerking awake, listening. Hours passed like that. Then, just before 3 a.m., I heard it again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Very faint, but unmistakable. I froze. It was right outside the tent. I swear I could hear the shift of weight in the dirt. Whoever it was, they were standing still, just breathing. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. I couldn't move. I didn't even blink. Eventually, the breathing stopped. Just like that. No footsteps leaving. No sound. Just gone. By morning, I felt sick. I packed up quickly, but my hands shook so badly I dropped the stove twice. I considered hiking straight back to the car, but I hesitated. I'd spent 2.5 days there. I didn't want to overreact. Maybe it had been the wind in the tent fabric, or my own imagination, so I stayed one more night. This was the mistake. It started raining in the evening, light at first, then steady. I kept dry inside the tent, but the sound of water dripping onto the fabric made it harder to hear anything else. Around midnight, the rain stopped. That silence returned. I sat up, wide awake, peg in hand. Then something touched the tent wall. Not brushed past, touched, pressed into it. A hand, I think, flat and slow, like someone was feeling along the side, maybe trying to figure out where the zipper was. I didn't breathe. Then the sound of a match striking. A single flick. A small flash of orange glow through the nylon. Someone was lighting a match just outside. Then another. Then another. Each time, the light glowed for a second, then went dark. I stayed still, hand clenched around the peg, until it stopped. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I just waited for the sky to turn gray. By morning, I knew I had to leave. I unzipped the tent and stepped out slowly. I checked the perimeter. Still no footprints. The rain had washed everything clean. But near the base of a tree about 10 feet away, I saw something. A burned match. Then another. I counted 12 of them, scattered in the dirt. That was it. I packed everything in a rush, barely even rolled the sleeping bag. I just shoved it all into my rucksack and started moving. I kept looking behind me. Every sound made me whip around. The woods didn't feel empty anymore. They felt observed. I reached the car just after noon. It was untouched, exactly where I left it. But as I opened the door, I saw something that made my heart skip. A small smear of ash across the driver's side window. Just one, as if someone had touched it with a match-blackened finger. I didn't stay another second. I drove straight out, didn't stop until I hit a petrol station 20 miles away. I used the bathroom mirror to check my face. I looked pale, drawn, my eyes too wide. I cleaned the ash off the window with a napkin and tossed it in the bin. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? That someone stood outside my tent and lit matches? For weeks after, I kept seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Shadows, glances, figures that weren't there. My sleep was wrecked. I'd bolt upright thinking I heard someone breathing. About a month later, I found myself looking up missing persons reports in Norfolk. I didn't know what I was expecting, maybe some pattern, but I didn't find anything solid. Eventually, the panic wore off. Life returned to normal, but I never went back there. I still camp, but always in groups, always in public sites. I've never spent another night alone in the woods, and I've never again heard the sound of a match being struck in the dark. But I think about it often. The matches, the breathing, the hand against the nylon. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the control. Whoever it was, they didn't rush it. They didn't make a sound unless they wanted me to hear it. They weren't trying to scare me off. They were studying me, waiting, and I'll never know what for. My name is Alan, and this happened back in late September of 2022. I was 33 at the time, living in Reno, Nevada, and working as a freelance mechanical engineer. I was going through a rough patch. My relationship had ended, work had slowed down, and I needed a break from people, phones, and city noise. I've always enjoyed the outdoors, so I figured a short solo camping trip would clear my head. I picked a spot in Northern California, just a bit past Lassen National Forest. Not an official campground, but a quiet clearing I found a few years back during a road trip. It was surrounded by thick pine trees, far enough off the old gravel road that nobody would randomly walk by, and close enough to a small stream for water. I had camped there twice before, and nothing bad ever happened. It was peaceful. That's what I wanted. The forecast said light rain in the area, nothing serious, just some drizzle. I had my rain fly, a waterproof tent, and good boots, so I wasn't worried. I loaded up my Tacoma with my gear: tent, sleeping bag, stove, water filter, hatchet, flashlight, first aid kit, and enough food for 2 nights. I left on a Thursday morning. The drive out took about 5 hours. I stopped in Susanville for gas and a few snacks, then drove another hour and a half down smaller forest roads until I reached the spot. The last mile or so was a rough dirt path. My truck handled it fine. When I got there, I was the only one around, just like I hoped. The clearing looked the same. Soft pine needles underfoot, the same half-buried tree stump I remembered, and that steady, quiet trickle of the stream nearby. I parked the truck and started setting up camp. It was overcast and cool, but dry. The kind of calm before the storm. I got the tent up, staked it tight, and threw the rain fly over it. I stacked some firewood I brought along, set up my little fold-out table and chair, and boiled water for a cup of instant coffee. By early afternoon, I was settled in. I spent the rest of the day walking around the area, checking out the stream and scouting for firewood. I didn't bring a gun, just a long camping knife, but I kept my eyes open for signs of wildlife. It was bear country after all. I didn't see any fresh tracks or droppings, just a few squirrels and birds, nothing to worry about. Around 5 in the evening, it started drizzling lightly. I made a quick dinner, canned chili with crackers, and ate under the small tarp I tied to 2 trees near the tent. I had a headlamp on and read a paperback mystery novel for a while, listening to the soft rain tap against the tarp and the tree leaves above. It was exactly what I needed. No distractions, just the woods and the rain and the quiet. It got dark fast, that kind of darkness that swallows everything. I turned off my light and listened. The rain got heavier. Wind picked up too. The trees started swaying. My tarp flapped, and I made a mental note to retie one of the cords in the morning. Around 9, I climbed into my tent and zipped it shut. I lay there for a while, not sleeping, just listening to the storm. Rain pounding the tent fly, trees creaking, the occasional snap of a branch somewhere out there. It wasn't scary, not at first. Felt cozy. The wind blew hard a few times, but the tent held steady. I was dry, warm, and tired. I must have fallen asleep close to midnight. I woke up around 2 in the morning. Not from a sound, from something else. A feeling. You know that strange moment when you go from deep sleep to fully awake in a second? That's what it felt like. My eyes opened and I was instantly alert. The rain hadn't stopped, and the wind was still going strong. But something felt different. I stayed still, listening. I could hear the stream faintly, the trees, the rain hitting the tent, and then something else, very faint, almost masked by the rain. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy ones, not crunching leaves, just the soft thud of something stepping through wet needles and dirt. My heart started beating faster. I held my breath and kept listening. Then I heard it again. 3, maybe 4 steps. Then silence. I slowly unzipped my sleeping bag, moving as quietly as I could. I sat up and reached for the flashlight. I clicked it on and aimed it at the tent wall, not turning it toward the front door. I didn't want to light myself up like a lantern. I waited another minute. Then something moved again, closer this time. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't that kind of movement. It sounded like someone walking barefoot or in socks. Just the dull press of weight into soft ground. Too slow and steady to be a deer, not the skittering steps of a raccoon or coyote. And it was only one set of footsteps. That's what really stuck in my head. There was only one. I held the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. I didn't know what I was going to do with either of them. I just sat frozen in place, listening. The rain kept hammering the tent. The wind blew hard again. A branch snapped somewhere far off. And then everything got quiet.
No footsteps.
Just storm noise. Another few minutes passed. I turned off the flashlight to save battery and crouched by the tent door. I didn't want to unzip it, but I needed to know if someone or something was actually out there. I didn't hear any more movement, but the feeling hadn't gone away. That heavy, cold awareness that I wasn't alone. I stayed like that for at least 15 minutes. My legs started to cramp. I finally crawled back to my sleeping bag and lay on top of it fully dressed. I held the flashlight tight in one hand and the knife in the other. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just stared at the tent ceiling, waiting to hear that sound again. It never came. By the time light started filtering through the trees, the storm had died down. The rain turned into a soft mist. I stepped out of the tent slowly, checking every direction. Everything looked normal, but that didn't make me feel better. I walked around the tent and found the footprints right away. Just one set. Heavy prints in the soft mud, heading toward the tent from the woods and stopping about 10 feet away. Then they turned around and went back the way they came. They weren't mine. I checked my boots and compared them. Different tread, deeper. These prints were bigger than mine and had an odd shape, like the person wasn't wearing proper hiking boots. More like worn-out work boots or something. Wide heel marks, uneven depth. One step looked like a limp or a dragging foot. The strangest part was that the prints didn't go near my truck. They didn't circle the site, just came from the trees, paused near the tent, and left. I followed them into the woods a bit. They weaved between some pines and disappeared near a fallen log about 50 yards out. Beyond that, the ground was too covered in pine needles to track. That was enough for me. I packed up everything in under 20 minutes. Tent, tarp, stove. All of it got jammed into the back of the truck as fast as I could. I didn't eat. I didn't even refill my water bottle. I just wanted to leave. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. Driving back out on the muddy trail was slow, but I didn't care. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see someone step out of the woods. I never did. Once I got back to the main road, I finally let myself breathe. I stopped at a gas station in Westwood to get coffee and warm up. I must have looked like hell. Wet clothes, bags under my eyes, muddy boots. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. I didn't say anything either. I made it home that afternoon and took the longest hot shower of my life. I haven't been back to that spot since. I don't know who was out there that night. Maybe it was just some crazy drifter. Maybe it was a local who saw my camp and wanted to mess with me. Whoever it was didn't try to rob me, didn't take anything, didn't break into my truck or cut the tent open. They just walked up in the rain, stood there for a while and walked away, like they were watching me sleep, like they were trying to decide something. Still bothers me even now. I still go camping, but never alone, and never in that part of the forest. Not after that night. It was the summer of 2011. I was 32 years old and had just taken 2 weeks off from my job at a repair shop in western Pennsylvania. I had no kids, no big commitments, and my only real plan was to get out of town, be alone, and clear my head. I've been thinking a lot about life lately. I wasn't in any trouble or anything like that, but sometimes you get stuck in a loop. Same town, same routine, same everything. I needed something different. I had this beat-up blue 1997 Chevy Tahoe, packed with a couple weeks' worth of canned food, water, a folding chair, my tent, a little propane stove, sleeping bag, a knife, some camping tools, and a 12-gauge Mossberg 500 just in case I ran into any wildlife. I didn't carry it to feel macho, it's just when you're out that far, and you're sleeping where bears or coyotes might show up, it's better to be safe than sorry. I'd done a lot of camping before, mostly in woods, near rivers, or on the edge of state parks. But this time, I wanted something odd, something people didn't do every day. So I drove northeast into the hills near Susquehanna County, not far from the New York border. I remembered an old graveyard up there on Ridge Hollow Road. I'd passed it years ago during a short trip. It wasn't maintained by the state or even a church anymore. Just one of those forgotten places sitting on public land, overgrown and sinking into the woods. The road leading to it was cracked and half swallowed by dirt and leaves. I figured nobody would be up there, and that's exactly what I wanted. No tourists, no other campers, no noise. I got there around 3 in the afternoon after driving for about 6 hours. The sun was still strong, and I could smell that dry summer air, the kind that burns the grass and makes everything smell like dust and weeds. I parked the truck just off the gravel road and walked the rest of the way with my gear. The graveyard sat behind a rusted wire fence that had partially collapsed. Most of the stones were unreadable, worn down to stumps or crooked slabs poking out of the soil. The trees had grown thick around the outer edge, and the whole place was wrapped in shadows, even with the sun still up. I set up camp about 20 yards beyond the graveyard fence, down in a shallow dip near a tree line. It felt weird camping that close to a place like that, but I didn't feel scared. It was just old rock and dirt. The dead were long gone. I wasn't thinking about ghosts or anything like that. What made me pause a little was how quiet it was.
No birds, no bugs.
Just the wind moving through the branches. I got my tent staked down, gathered some dry wood, and cooked a quick meal. Just beans and sausage. By the time I finished and cleaned up, the sun was dipping low. I climbed the ridge again and walked through the graveyard for a while. It was kind of peaceful in a strange way. The stones didn't mean much anymore. The names were mostly gone. The dates that were still visible said things like 1862 to 1875, or born 1801. This place had been dead a long time. Nothing left here but trees, moss, and whatever was buried 6 feet under. That first night, I sat by the fire until about 10 and then crawled into my tent. The ground was hard, but I was used to it. The stars were out, and the wind had finally calmed down. I slept okay, only waking once when I thought I heard footsteps. But when I poked my head out, nothing was there. I told myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon. The next morning, I woke up early and went on a long hike. I didn't bring my phone, didn't want GPS. I had a paper map and compass in my pack. I didn't want to see a screen or hear a ringtone. I walked about 4 miles through thick brush, uphill, following a game trail. I spotted a couple of deer, a wild turkey, and some old foundations, stone outlines of what might have been houses 100 years ago. I stopped near one of them and had lunch on a stump, thinking about how people used to live so far out here with nothing but wood, fire, and each other. I got back to camp around 5 p.m. and rested. My legs were sore, and my shirt was soaked with sweat. I built the fire again, ate something simple, then went up to the graveyard again, just as the light started to dim. The shadows stretched long across the grass, and a few bats fluttered between the trees. I stepped over a broken stone and saw something odd. on the far edge of the graveyard, there was a newer-looking wooden post in the ground. Not like the rest. It looked like someone had hammered it in recently. It wasn't a gravestone, just a post, with an old rope tied to it. The rope had been cut and frayed at the end, hanging limp. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the wood. It hadn't been there long. A few months, maybe. Definitely not from the 1800s. I looked around but didn't see any footprints or trash or anything that might have belonged to someone. Just empty woods and the edge of the graveyard. Still, it made me uneasy. That night, I kept the fire going longer. I sat with the shotgun close to me, just listening. At around midnight, I heard something again. Not footsteps, but something heavier. A crunch of branches, followed by the sound of breathing. Real heavy, labored breathing. I stood up slow and grabbed the flashlight. I shined it toward the sound, but there was nothing. I called out just a word, hoping it was a bear so it would run off. Nothing moved, but the breathing stopped. I stayed up until the fire died down and then crawled into the tent with my boots still on and the shotgun next to me. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I searched the area. I found broken twigs in the woods just 20 feet from camp and what looked like a footprint, barefoot.
No tread, no shoe marks.
Just a dirty heel print in the soft soil. I tried to tell myself maybe someone came up here, maybe a local kid messing around. But it didn't feel like a joke. Whoever it was hadn't left anything behind. No beer cans, no wrappers, no signs of camping. And that post with the rope stuck in my head. I moved my tent farther downhill that day, closer to the truck. I told myself it was just for comfort, but I knew better. I wasn't ready to leave yet, though. I don't know why. Some kind of stubbornness, I guess. I didn't want to spook myself out of a place just because something strange happened. But things got worse. That night, I stayed inside the truck with the seat leaned back. I kept the windows cracked, doors locked, and the shotgun laid across the seat. Around 3 a.m., I woke up because the truck was shaking. Not like an engine shake, like something was pushing it. I sat up fast and looked out the side mirror. Nothing. Just trees and dark. But then I heard tapping. Not on the door, but on the glass at the back hatch. I turned and looked, and through the fogged-up rear window, I saw a shape. Not a full body, just the outline of a head and shoulders. It wasn't moving, just standing there. I fumbled for the flashlight and aimed it backward. By the time I turned it on, the shape was gone. I opened the door, got out, and swept the light around. Nobody. I walked around the truck, heart hammering in my chest, finger on the trigger guard. I didn't go too far, just enough to check the perimeter. But the dirt near the rear tires had prints again, bare feet, and they were facing the back window. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. At sunrise, I packed everything into the truck. Tent, stove, gear, all of it. I wasn't going to wait around to see what happened next. I drove straight out of there and didn't look back until I hit the main road. I kept driving until I reached a town called Montrose. I got a cheap motel room and sat under the shower for 20 minutes, trying to clear my head. The next day, I went to the local sheriff's office. I didn't report a crime, just asked some questions. I told them I was camping near Ridge Hollow and wondered if anyone else had reported strange things up there. The deputy behind the desk raised his eyebrows and asked why I was camping up there in the first place. I told him I just wanted to be alone. He didn't give me much, just said it wasn't illegal, but people didn't go up there anymore. Too grown over, too forgotten. I asked if anything had ever happened there. He said not officially, but some folks used to say that Ridge was used for more than just burials. Back during Prohibition and even later, people went up there to do things away from the law. Illegal things, sometimes violent things. He didn't give details, just looked at me and said, "You're better off not sleeping in graveyards." I never went back. I still think about it sometimes, especially the prince. Who walks barefoot in the woods at night, that far from town? Who watches someone sleep inside a truck and doesn't try to talk or break in or ask for help? Why was that post out there with the rope? I don't have answers, but it wasn't a ghost. It was a person, or maybe a few, and that scared me more than anything else. Because people don't always need a reason to do something bad. Some just wait out there where no one's watching. I was 36 when I decided to go camping by myself that September. It was early fall, the kind where the nights drop cold fast, but the days are still warm and dry. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'd had a pretty heavy year. Divorce, job change, and just a lot of pressure that built up over months. I was tired of being around people and constantly feeling like I had to explain what I was doing or why I hadn't bounced back yet. I needed quiet, real quiet. No phones, no traffic, no lights glowing under my curtains at night. Just woods and air and the kind of silence that makes you listen to your heartbeat. I didn't want to go too far, but still needed it to feel like I was out in the middle of nowhere. I'd heard of the Wesser Creek Trail in North Carolina, just a couple of hours' drive from where I lived. Not many people went up that way. Most hikers stuck to the more popular parts of the Appalachian Trail. I did some quick research, saw a few old forum posts about the area, and figured I'd give it a go. The plan was to hike in about 4 or 5 miles, set up camp by the water, stay 2 nights, and hike out on the 3rd morning. I left on a Wednesday early in the morning. My pack was heavy with the usual gear: tent, sleeping bag, jet boil, 2 days worth of food, extra socks, water filter, bear spray, all that. I parked at the small pull-off where the forest road ended. There were no other cars there, just a little gravel clearing with leaves starting to build up from the early fall drop. I signed into the logbook tucked in the weatherproof box at the trailhead. Last person had signed in 5 days before me. I noted it, but it didn't bother me. That's what I wanted after all solitude. The hike in was slow. The trail had probably been nice 10 or 15 years ago, but now it was mostly just a narrow path with overgrown brush and blowdowns every quarter mile. I had to crawl under one log, then later climb over another one slick with moss. Still, it felt good to move, good to have trees on all sides and to hear nothing but the breeze pushing through the branches and the sound of my boots against the dirt. By mid-afternoon, I made it to where I wanted to camp, a small clearing near a bend in Wesser Creek. The ground was mostly level, with enough space to pitch the tent and keep some distance from the fire pit I found already built, probably from other hikers or hunters who passed through. I set up, hung my food bag from a thick branch a good 30 yards out, and got a little fire going as the shadows started to stretch. I remember just sitting there for a long time watching the water. The creek wasn't loud, but steady, like a soft whisper that never stopped. Felt peaceful. And it stayed that way all through the first night. I woke up once around 2 a.m. to pee and stood outside the tent for a minute or two. There was no wind, and the sky was full of stars. Everything was still. I went back in the tent, zipped it up, and fell asleep again pretty quick. The next day was just more of the same peace and quiet. I hiked upstream a little, filled my bottle with filtered water, sat on a flat rock and just let time pass. I didn't check the time once that whole day. At some point in the late afternoon, I started making some freeze-dried food and added a couple of sticks to the fire I had going again. That was when I noticed the first odd thing. It was small, just a stick, looked freshly broken, leaning up against the base of a tree a little too neatly, about 15 feet away. I hadn't seen it there before. I'm not the type to think the woods are full of mysteries or anything, but I knew I hadn't put it there. Maybe I missed it. Maybe it had been part of a limb that snapped and fell and landed like that. I told myself it was nothing. Probably was. Still, I took a few glances at it while eating. The second night, I had a harder time sleeping. Not because I was scared, just because my back was a little stiff and the cold kept creeping into my bag. I must have drifted in and out of sleep, because I remember hearing the creak a few times and then nothing for long stretches. But around maybe 3 a.m., I woke up again. This time it was because of a noise, something distinct, a stick cracking close. I stayed still. I kept telling myself animals move around at night all the time. That's normal. But this sound wasn't the quick, scurrying kind of sound you hear from raccoons or possums. It was slower, more deliberate. I waited, holding my breath, listening. There was nothing for a while, then another crack. Closer now. I slowly reached for the bear spray I kept by my side in the tent and held it in my hand, just in case. I didn't unzip the tent. I just waited. After another minute, the sounds stopped altogether. No movement, no more cracking. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I walked around the perimeter of my camp. I looked at the dirt and the damp spots by the trees. There weren't any clear boot prints or anything, but about 30 feet from my tent I found another stick, this one smaller, balanced against a different tree in almost the exact same way as the one from the day before. That wasn't natural. I didn't like it, and I started thinking maybe someone else was in the area messing around. Some backwoods hunter maybe, or just a jerk who got a kick out of creeping people out. Still, I figured if they wanted to hurt me, they'd have done it already, and I was heading out the next morning anyway. I didn't light a fire that night. I ate cold food and stayed inside my tent with the zipper half open so I could hear better. No headphones, no books, no distractions. Just me, laying still, listening to the woods. Sometime around midnight, I heard movement again. This time it was even slower. No snapping branches, just the sound of something brushing through low brush and grass, like a large person trying to move quietly but not succeeding. It circled the area once. I could feel the direction change by the sound. From one side of the tent to the back, then over near where I'd hung the food bag. Then nothing. Total silence. About 10 minutes passed. Then came the sharp clink of metal, soft but distinct. That made my heart pound. I kept my cooking gear stacked inside a small bag by a log near the fire ring. That metal sound was something, maybe a pot, being moved. That wasn't a raccoon. No way. I sat up and quietly got my boots on, bear spray still in my hand. After a long stretch of silence, I unzipped the tent slowly and poked my head out. The moonlight gave enough light to see the shapes of trees and the outline of my gear pile. I stared for what felt like forever, looking for movement. Nothing. I stepped out, still listening. No wind, just the creak again. I moved to the gear pile. One pot was on its side now, a couple of feet from the rest. The bag had been pulled slightly open. That metal clink I'd heard was real. Someone had touched it. I turned slowly, trying to spot anything in the woods around me. That's when I saw him. A man, standing maybe 40 feet away, beyond the edge of the trees.
No flashlight. No visible gear.
Just a figure in a dark jacket, watching. He wasn't moving. My whole body went tight. I didn't run. I didn't yell. I just stood there frozen with the bear spray ready. After maybe 5 seconds, longest 5 seconds of my life, he turned and walked away, slow and steady, back into the trees. I stayed up till dawn, sitting by the fire ring with my back to a tree and both a knife and spray in hand. I didn't sleep at all. The woods stayed quiet, and the man never came back. But I knew I wasn't alone out there. At first light, I packed everything up faster than I ever had before. I didn't bother cooking breakfast. I grabbed my gear, double-checked that I hadn't left anything, and took off down the trail. Every 100 yards, I stopped and turned to listen. My nerves were shot. At one point, I swear I heard steps behind me, but I couldn't see anything. Could have been paranoia. Could have been him. I didn't wait to find out. The trail back felt 10 times longer than it had 2 days earlier. I didn't stop to rest once. I made it to the car by noon and got out of there as fast as I could. I never called the cops. What could I have told them? Some guy watched me from the woods? No name, no face, no harm done? They wouldn't have taken it seriously. And maybe there was nothing to report. But I knew what I saw. That wasn't an accident. He didn't stumble onto my camp. He'd been there the night before, and probably watching the whole time. The sticks against the trees, that was him, leaving signs, letting me know. To this day, I don't know what he wanted. I don't know why he didn't do anything more. Maybe just watching was enough for him. Or maybe he was waiting for something that didn't happen. But I haven't been camping alone since. I still go into the woods sometimes. Day hikes, short trails. But once the sun starts dipping low, I head back to the truck. I've got no interest in finding out what would have happened if I'd stayed one more night. I was 34 when I went on that hunting trip to Deer Creek in the fall of 2013. Back then, I lived just outside of Carson, Wyoming, a small quiet town that didn't see much trouble. I worked at a lumber mill, lived in a modest house with a fenced yard, and didn't have much in the way of family except for a younger sister down in Colorado. I wasn't married, didn't have kids, just me and my rifle most weekends, and I was fine with that. Every October, I'd take a week off work to go hunting. I liked being alone in the woods. No traffic, no small talk, just the cold air and the sound of your own boots on the dirt. That year, I decided to head deeper than usual, north of Deer Creek, about 3 miles off any trail. I'd studied the topographic maps ahead of time and found a small plateau with a stream nearby and signs of game. I figured it would be a good place to camp and hunt for mule deer. I packed my gear with care. My Remington 700.30-06, 2 boxes of cartridges, a large canvas tent, sleeping bag, propane stove, freeze-dried food, a map, compass, and a GPS backup just in case. I also brought a small hatchet, a hunting knife, and my usual first aid kit. I always over-prepared because when you're alone in the wild, nobody's coming to help you if something goes sideways. I drove my truck down a forestry road until it turned to gravel, then kept going until it became little more than 2-tire ruts in the weeds. From there, I parked in a wide pull-off where I wouldn't be seen from the road. I slung my pack over my shoulders, locked up, and started the hike up toward the spot I'd marked. The air was cold, sharp with the smell of pine. Fall hadn't yet brought snow, but the leaves were turning, and the wind had a chill that cut through my jacket when it picked up. The hike took about 2 hours, and I broke a sweat halfway up. The sun was lower when I reached the clearing. It was as perfect as I hoped, level ground, a view of the ridgeline to the east, and a gentle slope toward a creek just 100 yards down. I could hear the water running before I saw it. I set up camp methodically as I always did. Tent first, then the sleeping bag rolled out, then the stove and cookware. Once I had everything in order, I walked the area a bit. I spotted fresh droppings and a few tracks, good signs. A scrape mark on a tree told me a buck had been through recently. I was excited. I ate a quick meal of rehydrated stew, drank some coffee, and sat by the tent until dark. The woods were quiet, just wind and the occasional crack of a branch. That night, I slept soundly. Nothing unusual. The second day, I was up before the sun. I made coffee, threw on an extra layer, and headed toward a saddle between 2 ridges where I expected deer to cross. I moved slowly, pausing often, eyes scanning, ears open. By mid-morning, I saw a doe and 2 yearlings but held off. I was after a buck. I stayed out until just before dusk and hiked back to camp, empty-handed but satisfied. That's how it usually went. The early days were for watching. Back at camp, I cooked, cleaned my gear, and wrote a few notes in a small waterproof notebook I kept. Still nothing unusual. The third morning, though, something felt off. When I stepped outside the tent, I saw fresh boot prints in the soft dirt near the creek. That stopped me cold. They weren't mine. They were newer, too. I always wore the same pair of heavy-soled hunting boots, and I could recognize my own tread easily. These were different, wider, maybe a size 11 or 12, with a more rounded heel pattern. They came from the tree line, stopped near the water, and then turned back. I stood there for a long minute, scanning the woods. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anyone. Whoever it was hadn't disturbed my tent or gear, and nothing was missing. Still, it put me on edge. That far out, you don't expect company. If someone was out here, I wanted to know why. I spent most of that day checking the area. I moved carefully, circling the camp, scanning for signs. I found no more tracks, no signs of a second camp, no trail markers or broken branches. Nothing that said someone had moved through recently. Just those damn footprints. I slept lightly that night, my rifle close by, ears tuned for the sound of anything unnatural. I heard nothing. The fourth day, I hunted closer to camp. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't want to be too far in case I had to pack up and move. I saw another doe, but nothing worth taking. The boot prints were still visible near the creek, and I studied them again. Still only one set, still headed in and out in the same direction. I tried to shake it off. Maybe someone else had just passed through. Maybe they were as surprised to see my prints as I was to see theirs. That night, something strange happened. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of crunching leaves outside my tent. Not an animal. It was too slow, too deliberate. I stayed still, every muscle tight, listening. It stopped just outside the tent. No breathing, no flashlight, no movement. I waited a full 10 minutes. Then I reached for the zipper, fast and quiet, and peeked out. There was no one there, but I could see the faint outline of fresh prints in the frosty grass, leading away. I didn't sleep after that. The first light, I broke camp. I wasn't panicked, but I didn't like the idea of someone sneaking around my tent in the dead of night. I packed everything back into my frame pack and started hiking out. But halfway down the slope, I stopped. I saw something through the trees, off to the left, near the base of a dry ridge. It was the corner of a camouflage tarp, half buried under pine needles. I stepped closer. Under it was a small nylon tent, almost invisible if you weren't looking. No markings, no fire pit, no trail. Just a sleeping bag, a half-eaten food packet, and some empty water bottles. A backpack was stashed against a log nearby. I didn't touch anything, just looked. Something felt off. It wasn't abandoned, not really. There were signs someone had slept there recently. And then I saw something else. Binoculars on a tripod, aimed right toward the spot where my tent had been. That hit me hard. Whoever this was, they'd been watching me, maybe for days. I didn't stay to investigate further. I backtracked, put distance between me and that camp, and cut a wider path back to the road. I didn't stop moving. My heart was racing the whole time. I didn't feel safe until I saw the glint of my truck through the trees. When I finally got to it, I checked the tires and undercarriage. All looked fine. I got in and drove straight back to town. I didn't tell anyone right away. A part of me thought maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe it was a coincidence. But a week later, I reported the location to the sheriff's office anyway. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but I never heard anything back. I didn't go hunting the next year, or the year after that. I told myself I was busy, that work was too demanding. But the truth was, every time I thought about heading back out alone, I remembered that night. The sound of leaves crunching, the way those binoculars were aimed right at me, the footprints. Something about it still doesn't sit right with me. Maybe it was just a drifter, maybe someone with issues, but I've thought a lot about how things could have gone differently. If I hadn't woken up, if I hadn't looked out, if I had stayed another night. Sometimes people assume the woods are dangerous because of animals, bears or cougars, but animals don't sit in the dark outside your tent. Animals don't bring binoculars. They don't watch. I still hunt now, but only on leased land, and always with someone else. I don't camp far out anymore. I don't go off trail, and I never assume I'm alone. That trip changed the way I think about the woods. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I almost didn't. And that's what stays with me. The silence, the watching, and the feeling that I was never really as alone as I thought. My name is David Hale. I'm 43 now, but I still remember that camping trip in the summer of 2009 better than anything else I've ever lived through. It wasn't special at first. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend in the woods, a solo camping trip. I'd done those before, but the place I chose that year was near a forgotten cemetery tucked deep in the forest, a spot I should have avoided, not because it was haunted or cursed or anything like that, none of that nonsense, but because people go out to places like that to do things they don't want to be seen doing. I had just gotten out of a long relationship and wanted to be alone for a few days. No phone, no work emails, just me, my tent, a camp stove, and a few books. I'd found a map at the ranger station in Balsam Creek, a small town in central Arkansas. I noticed a spot labeled Old Haven Cemetery, EST 1878, in faded ink. The woman at the desk said there hadn't been a burial there in nearly 50 years, and that it was hard to find now unless you knew what you were looking for. That was exactly what I was looking for: solitude. So I bought supplies, packed my car, and drove out toward the woods. The gravel road leading into the forest turned to dirt after a few miles, then narrowed into twin ruts barely wide enough for my Subaru. I parked when the trail became impassable and hiked the last half mile with my gear strapped to my back. I found the graveyard mostly by accident. Just a short wire fence sunk in weeds, with the tips of headstones barely poking through. You wouldn't have seen it if you weren't looking, but to me it looked perfect. The ground was mostly level, surrounded by tall pines. I could hear nothing but the wind in the branches and the occasional bird call. I set up camp on a little rise just west of the cemetery, maybe 30 yards from the fence. I figured it was respectful enough. I wasn't planning to bother anything. I just liked the peace. The sun dropped behind the trees as I boiled water for coffee. I read for a while, wrote a few notes in a journal I kept, and crawled into my sleeping bag not long after dark. It got cold quicker than I expected. In the city, summer nights stay warm, but out in the woods, with nothing between you and the sky, the air changes fast. I zipped the bag up to my chin and listened to the stillness. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of snapping twigs. At first, I figured it was a deer or maybe a raccoon nosing around my camp. I didn't move. I just listened. The sound came again, dry sticks breaking under weight. It wasn't fast. It was slow and irregular, like someone stepping carefully, testing the ground. It moved around my tent, just outside the reach of my small campfire, which had burned down to a dull orange glow. I stayed still. I wasn't panicking, not yet. I had a hatchet by my sleeping bag, and I remembered it without even opening my eyes. I kept my breathing slow and quiet. Whoever, or whatever, was outside didn't make any noise beyond those footsteps. No talking.
No rustling.
Just movement. I waited a long time. Eventually, the sound drifted off toward the tree line. I didn't sleep again that night. When the sun finally came up, I got out of the tent and walked the perimeter of my camp. Nothing was missing. Nothing disturbed. No tracks that I could find. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal curious about the smell of food. I boiled water for oatmeal and coffee, read more, and explored the edge of the cemetery. The graveyard was old, but not creepy the way you might expect. Most of the stones had fallen over, worn down by time and weather. Some were broken in half. Moss and vines grew over the names. I only made out a few Mabel D., 1884 to 1922, and another with only infant son and a year, 1910. It was clear no one had visited in decades. I didn't go poking around beyond the fence. I wasn't there to play ghost hunter or mess with graves. I just liked how quiet it was. You could hear your own heartbeat if you sat still long enough. The second night was colder. I lit a small fire and cooked a bit of canned stew. It didn't taste like much, but it was warm. I heard owls calling to each other as the last light faded. I sat near the fire with a flashlight and one of my books until I got too tired to keep my eyes open. This time, the sound came earlier, maybe just after 10. I was still half awake when I heard it. Footsteps again, but closer, more deliberate. I turned off my flashlight, froze. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to stay hidden anymore. I could hear the weight in each step. Slow, crunching pine needles. Then I caught something new. The sound of breathing, close, just outside the tent wall. A slow nasal breath, in out, then silence. I grabbed the hatchet. I didn't unzip the tent. I wasn't stupid. I waited. I must have stayed like that for hours, gripping the handle with white knuckles, my ears straining. But I never heard the thing leave. Eventually, just before dawn, I passed out from exhaustion. The next morning, I found a mark on the side of the tent. A long, clean slash in the nylon, maybe 8 inches long, just behind where my head would have been. Not torn, cut. I stood there, staring at it, the hatchet still in my hand. That wasn't an animal. That was someone with a knife. I packed my gear as fast as I could. My heart was racing, hands shaking. I kept stopping to look over my shoulder. The woods were too quiet. I should have left right then. I should have thrown my bag on my back and hiked to the car and driven away. But something kept me there. Not fear, not stubbornness. Something else. Like I had to understand who was out there. Why they hadn't just come into the tent. Why they stood there, breathing, cutting, watching. And besides, it would be light for hours. I had a fire. I had an axe. I could keep one more night, then go in the morning. That's what I told myself. I spent most of that day gathering firewood and sharpening sticks. I broke a long branch and carved one end into a point. I set it near the fire. Sounds stupid now, but it made me feel better to have it. I made sure everything in my pack was ready to go. I left the cut tent zipped, even though it was useless now. I even thought about sleeping outside by the fire, but I knew I couldn't keep my eyes open all night. Around dusk, I moved the fire closer to the tent. I stacked dry wood in arm's reach so I could keep it going through the night. I laid the pointed stick and hatchet beside my sleeping bag. I didn't undress. I kept my boots on. I didn't plan on sleeping much, but I must have dozed off sometime after midnight. I woke up to a sound I will never forget. Not footsteps, not breathing, just the sound of someone dragging something heavy through dry leaves. I sat up fast, heart in my throat, and reached for the hatchet. The fire had burned low, just a few flickers left. I could barely see past the edge of the tent. The dragging sound came from the direction of the cemetery. Then it stopped. Nothing for a long time. Then I heard something being dropped hard on the ground. A deep, solid thump, like wood hitting dirt. And then another, and another. I thought of shovels. I don't know why. Maybe because of where I was. But the sound wasn't quite right. It wasn't digging. It was heavier, more final. I waited. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. Couldn't tell. When I finally unzipped the tent and stepped out, it was close to dawn. The sky was pale blue. I crept toward the graveyard with the hatchet raised. The air was dead still. At the far end of the fence, I found what had made the noise. There was a small wooden box sitting next to one of the headstones. New wood, clean edges. Someone had built it recently. It wasn't big. Maybe 3 feet long, 2 feet high. Nailed shut. Not buried. Just sitting there. I didn't touch it. I didn't even go close. I turned around, walked back to camp, packed up in silence, and left everything I didn't need. I didn't eat. didn't drink. I hiked straight back to the car with my heart pounding and didn't stop once to rest. When I got to the Subaru, I threw my gear in the back and drove like hell down the dirt road, fishtailing in the ruts, windshield smeared with sweat. I didn't go to the police. What would I tell them? That I'd camped by an abandoned graveyard and heard scary sounds? That someone left a wooden box and maybe tried to cut open my tent? They'd laugh me out of the station. Or worse, they'd open a report and I'd have to be part of it. I didn't want to be involved. I drove straight back to Little Rock, took a long shower, sat on the floor of my apartment with the lights on, didn't sleep that night. A week later, I went to the public records office and searched for Old Haven Cemetery. Took time. It wasn't in any modern maps. I had to go through paper files, old land records. I finally found a mention in a property deed from 1913. It listed a man named Howard Kimsey as the caretaker. That name meant nothing to me, but I looked it up anyway. Howard Kimsey died in 1952. No children. But there was a note in the record that caught my eye. Cemetery sold to private buyer in 1964. Name withheld. I stopped there. I didn't want to know any more. That was 16 years ago. I haven't been camping since. Not once. I still think about that sound, something heavy being dragged, then dropped. I think about that wooden box. Who carried it out there? Why they left it? What was inside? But I never went back. I never will. There's nothing supernatural about what happened. Nothing magical. Just something real and cold and dangerous. Something human. And that, I think, is the scariest part. It was the summer of 2012 when I decided to take a break from everything. I was 33 at the time, burned out from work, tired of the noise in the city, and frustrated with the people I dealt with every day. I lived in Manchester back then, but I was originally from the Northeast. I had done a bit of camping here and there, usually with friends or family, but that summer I wanted something quieter. I wanted to be alone, not in a desperate or sad way, just alone, completely for once. I spent a few days reading forums and checking maps. I didn't want a packed campground with other tents pitched 10 feet away. I wasn't looking for trail markers or camp stores or rangers doing checks. I wanted isolation. I found a small patch of forest near the Scottish border, not far from Kielder Forest but a bit further east, closer to the Cheviot Hills. The area wasn't totally empty. It was farmland mixed with thick woods, some crumbling stone fences still marking old boundaries. There was no phone signal up there, and the satellite maps showed barely any trails. That was what I wanted. I took my old Ford Transit up and parked it on a quiet levee about 2 miles from where I planned to hike in. I locked it, shouldered my gear, and walked down a rutted path that passed through some thinning trees before dropping into a quiet valley. The weather had been dry for weeks, and the whole area had this muted gold and green look. Wild grasses, patches of thistle, and the occasional low-hanging branch clawing at my pack. I carried a 3-day supply of food, a solid one-person tent, a steel water bottle with a filter pump, and a machete. I wasn't worried about people, but I figured if I came across a sheep that had died or something and needed to clear it, I'd rather have a blade than not. By mid-afternoon, I found a spot that felt right. It was a flat patch above a slow stream, just on the edge of a tree line. I could see open field on one side and thick, dark green woods on the other. Felt safe, removed from the world. I set up my tent, pulled out a small stool, and sat for a while just listening. There was barely any wind, no cars.
No planes.
Just the occasional chirp from a bird and the soft sound of water moving over smooth rock. That first night was peaceful. I cooked instant noodles on my small stove and watched the sun dip down behind the trees. As darkness fell, I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the woods as I drifted off to sleep. The second day passed easily. I walked up the slope behind my camp and followed what might have once been a wall, made of moss-covered stones barely reaching knee-height now. I found a rusted gate hinge still fixed to a rotting post, and what might have once been a tool shed or animal pen. Just old remains of something rural that had been abandoned a long time ago. I didn't touch much. I just looked. I didn't see anyone. No signs of recent life. Just slow decay and the smell of earth and pine. That afternoon, I filled my bottle at the stream, filtered it, and sat under the trees. Around 6 p.m., I heard something strange. It was distant at first. A low thumping sound, like someone hitting the ground with something soft but heavy. Not rhythmic, just a few dull thuds. Then silence. I stood up, heart suddenly kicking a little harder. I stared into the trees, but I didn't see anything. The sound hadn't been close, but it wasn't far either. I waited there for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing moved. The woods were still. I told myself it was a deer, or maybe a rabbit hopping through thick brush. Eventually, I sat back down, ate my dinner, still had an uneasy feeling, but nothing followed. That night, I lay in the tent longer than the night before, eyes wide open, listening. I didn't hear anything else. The third morning started with heavy mist. I unzipped the tent and could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The entire world felt muffled and still. I didn't like it. The stream, just a few feet away, had gone quiet in the mist. I had no signal, no timekeeper except the sun, which was hidden now. I boiled water, made coffee, and sat again on the stool, waiting for the fog to lift. By midday it cleared. I packed a few snacks and decided to follow the stream deeper into the woods. Curved east, and after maybe a mile, I found another clearing. This one was different. It wasn't natural. There were old beams scattered in the grass, wood that had been sawed, blackened on the ends. Maybe it had been a cabin. I saw what looked like a collapsed corner of a foundation and rusted tin scattered under the weeds. But that wasn't what got to me. About 20 feet from the center of the clearing was a thick stake, hammered deep into the soil. It had been charred, too. Not recently, but not centuries ago either. There was rope around it, frayed and half-buried, but definitely rope. As if something or someone had once been tied to it. I didn't go closer. I just stood there staring. I took a few steps back, heart starting to pick up. I've been hiking alone in many places, but this felt wrong. The air didn't feel right here. The quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. I turned around and started walking back. I didn't run, but I walked quickly, scanning the trees. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaf made me flinch. I didn't feel watched, exactly, but I felt surrounded by something I couldn't explain. When I reached my tent, I checked everything. Nothing had been touched. Still, I packed up. I had planned to stay another night, maybe 2, but my gut told me to leave. I started the hike back up the slope toward where I'd parked, heart calming as I moved away from the woods. I could see the light through the trees. I could smell fresh air again. I made it back to the van by sunset, but the driver's side mirror was gone. Not cracked, not broken, just gone. The screws that had held it in place were still there, clean and shiny like someone had used proper tools. I stared at it, stunned, my hands shaking a little. Someone had been there. Someone had been at my van while I was deep in the woods. They didn't smash anything. They didn't break in. They just removed the mirror and left. Clean, silent. I unlocked the van and checked inside. Nothing was taken. Nothing touched. It didn't make sense. I looked around the lobby. No tracks. No notes. Just that missing mirror. I didn't sleep that night. I drove to a motorway rest stop and parked in the bright light between 2 lorries and stayed up all night, watching the mirrorless side of the van. I couldn't explain what had happened. I didn't know what they wanted. I just knew I wasn't going back. A week later, Back home in Manchester, I went online to see if anyone had reported anything strange in that area. Nothing. No recent crimes. No missing people. No known squatters in that forest. I checked again the next week. Still nothing. It was like whoever had done it wanted to make sure I knew they were there. But that was it. No message. No follow-up. Just a single, quiet act of presence. That missing mirror haunted me for months. Not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. Someone had known exactly where I was. They'd walked up to my vehicle, removed a part of it without damaging anything else, and left without a trace. I had no enemies. No one even knew where I'd gone. Years later, I still think about that third night. That patch of land with the burned stake. The rope. The heavy thumping sound. The clean removal of the mirror. It wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't a monster. It was something human. And that was what made it so much worse. Someone out there had been close enough to hear me breathing in my tent. Close enough to see where I had parked, followed my trail, and left their quiet message. I still camp now and then, but never alone. Never in places with no signal. Never without backup plans and people who know exactly where I'll be. That part of the world, those hills and woods near the border, still show up in my dreams. Sometimes in broad daylight, sometimes under thick fog. And sometimes when I check my van's mirrors before getting in, I still pause and look twice, just to make sure. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. It was late October of 2018, and the cold was starting to bite in the northern parts of Minnesota. The trees were bare except for a few stubborn leaves, all orange and brown, rustling in the crisp wind. I decided to take my dog, Max, with me for a weekend camping trip deep in the Superior National Forest. Max was a 4-year-old German Shepherd mix, big, smart, and loyal. He had been with me since I adopted him from the shelter 2 years ago, and he was my closest companion. I trusted him completely. I'd been under a lot of stress lately. Work was rough, and the city noise was driving me crazy. I wanted silence, isolation, and some time to think. This forest was perfect for that. I packed my gear carefully. A tent, warm clothes, food, water, a first aid kit, and Max's leash and supplies. I also had a small handheld GPS and a flashlight with extra batteries just in case. The cell phone signal was spotty out there, but I made sure to tell a friend my plans and when I expected to be back. The drive up was long and quiet. The roads narrowed as I got closer to the forest, and finally, I reached a small dirt parking lot near one of the hiking trailheads. It was almost noon when I started walking with Max. The air was cool but fresh, filled with the smell of pine needles and earth. Max's ears perked up as he sniffed the ground, tail wagging slightly. We moved slowly, the only sounds the crunch of leaves beneath my boots and Max's soft panting. I wanted to set up camp near a small lake I'd found on the map, about 4 miles in. It wasn't a popular spot, so I was expecting few, if any, other people. The trail twisted through thick stands of pine and birch, the trees tall and straight, their trunks rough under my hands when I brushed past. Birds flew overhead, crows mostly, their black wings cutting through the sky. As we walked, Max stayed close, occasionally darting ahead to check scents, but never too far. I kept my eyes on the path, but I couldn't help noticing how quiet everything was. The forest felt alive, but in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. No other hikers passed us. No distant voices. No rustling in the underbrush beyond Max's presence. Just the wind, the trees, and us. Around mid-afternoon, I reached the lake. It was small but beautiful. Still water, dark and deep, reflecting the gray sky above. The shoreline was rocky, with patches of moss and dead leaves. I found a flat spot among the trees close to the water and started setting up the tent. Max circled the area a few times, nose to the ground, alert but calm. I built a small fire pit from stones and gathered some dry wood. The smell of burning pine filled the air as I lit the fire, feeling the warmth spread through my cold fingers. After dinner, a simple meal of canned stew heated over the fire. I sat back against a log, Max lying beside me, eyes half closed but ears still twitching. The sun dipped low behind the trees, shadows lengthening until the whole forest seemed to hold its breath. I was alone here except for Max, and despite the peace, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease creeping over me. As night fell fully, the forest changed. The temperature dropped sharply, and the sounds became harder to place. Every snap of a twig or rustle in the bushes made me tense. Max was alert, sitting upright now, his gaze scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. I called him close and clipped his leash to his collar, wanting to keep him near. I had brought a flashlight but didn't want to ruin the night's natural darkness. Instead, I used the firelight to check my gear, eat some snacks, and prepare for bed. I zipped up in my sleeping bag inside the tent, Max curled at my feet. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the fire crackled low. Around midnight, I was woken by a strange noise. It was faint but distinct, a low growl mixed with a soft rustling. Max growled sharply, standing up and straining against his leash. My heart jumped. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent, trying to stay calm. The fire was almost out, just glowing embers now. The forest outside was black except for the dim light from the embers and my weak flashlight beam. I could see Max standing stiffly, ears pinned forward, eyes fixed on something in the shadows beyond the fire pit. The growling continued, low and threatening. I shone the light into the woods, but the trees swallowed the beam. Nothing moved, but the sound was close now, just beyond the circle of light. I felt a cold sweat break out. I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't a normal animal sound. It was deep, rough, and too deliberate. My mind raced with possibilities. Bears could be dangerous, but their growl was different. Coyotes bark and yip, but this was a low growl, almost like a human voice trying to imitate an animal. I tried to calm Max, murmuring softly. He sat back down but didn't stop watching. The growling stopped suddenly, replaced by silence so thick I could hear my own breathing. Then, a sharp snap, like a branch breaking, came from my left. Max jumped up again, barking loudly this time. I grabbed the flashlight and swept the beam in that direction. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a figure maybe, just beyond the trees. It was tall and thin, standing still. But when I focused, it was gone. I blinked, heart pounding. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks in the dark. I decided to pack up as quietly as possible. I didn't want to stay another minute in that spot. Max was nervous but ready to follow me. I grabbed the leash and some essentials and started breaking down the camp. The fire I let burn out. The night was quiet again, but I felt eyes on me, watching from the dark. I didn't run but moved briskly back toward the trailhead. Max stayed close, his steps steady but alert. The trail felt longer, every sound sharper. I kept the flashlight on, scanning the trees ahead and behind. The growling never came back, but I could still feel a presence. About 2 miles from the lake, I heard a sudden noise from the bushes to my right, something large crashing through undergrowth. Max barked fiercely and lunged toward the sound, pulling hard on his leash. I caught him just before he broke free, heart racing. Suddenly, a man stepped out into the path. He was tall, dirty, wearing a torn jacket and a cap pulled low. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and his face was dirty and scratched. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't seen another person in days. For a moment, I froze. He didn't say anything, just stared. I didn't want trouble, so I backed away slowly, keeping Max close. The man didn't follow. After a tense minute, he turned and vanished back into the woods. I didn't look back. The rest of the walk was nerve-wracking but uneventful. When I finally reached the parking lot, relief washed over me like warm water. I called my friend, letting him know I was okay and leaving immediately. That night at home, I sat with Max beside me, trying to make sense of what happened. The forest was a place of peace, but also danger. I realized then how important it was to respect that balance. My trip didn't give me answers about the man or the noises, but it reminded me that sometimes the scariest things are the ones you can't explain. I promised myself to be better prepared next time, more careful and always alert, and I knew Max and I would face whatever came together. The forest wasn't just trees and silence. It was alive with things you might never see, but you could always feel. The year was 2018. I was 32 years old, and I had been living in North Carolina for a few years, working in a small town near Asheville. After months of nonstop work and city noise, I needed a break. I wanted to get away from everything, to clear my head. The Appalachian Mountains were perfect for that. Dense forests, winding streams, rugged trails, and a sense of isolation that only the wild can provide. I planned a solo camping trip deep in the Pisgah National Forest, far from the usual hiking paths and crowded campgrounds. I had done my homework. I picked a spot that was not on any popular map, just a place I found by studying satellite images and reading old forums where locals shared secret camping spots. The spot was near a bend in the French Broad River, about 15 miles from the nearest road. No cell service, no trails, just wilderness. I packed my gear carefully: tent, sleeping bag, water filter, enough food for 3 days, a sturdy knife, matches, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I wasn't a survival expert, but I knew how to handle myself in the woods. I started my hike early on a Friday morning in October. The air was crisp and cool, with a hint of autumn in the smell of wet leaves and pine. The forest was alive with quiet sounds: rustling leaves, distant bird calls, the occasional snap of a twig. I walked steadily, carrying my backpack, feeling the satisfying ache in my legs and back as I pushed deeper into the wilderness. The trail I followed at first was faint, barely visible. Soon it disappeared altogether, and I found myself navigating by landmarks and the compass on my phone, careful not to rely too much on technology. By late afternoon, I reached the river bend I had targeted. The area was exactly as I imagined: thick forest surrounding a small clearing next to the water, where the river curved gently around a cluster of rocks. The ground was soft and covered in moss and fallen leaves. I set up my tent carefully between some trees, not too close to the riverbank, but close enough to hear the water's steady murmur. As I worked on the campfire, gathering dry wood and kindling, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the trees. The colors of the forest were rich, deep greens, rusty reds, golden yellows. I cooked a simple meal of canned beans and rice, drinking water filtered from the river. After dinner, I sat quietly by the fire, watching the flames flicker and listening to the forest at night. That first night was calm but cold. I slept soundly despite the unfamiliar noises: small animals rustling in the underbrush, the call of an owl, the soft rush of the river. I felt completely alone but safe. The next day, I explored the area more, walking along the river, taking photos and collecting firewood. The forest was beautiful but wild. I noticed signs of wildlife everywhere: tracks of deer, broken branches from bears, piles of raccoon scat. I stayed alert, knowing the risks but trusting my instincts and preparation. Late that afternoon, while returning to camp, I spotted something odd. On the other side of the river, Among the thick trees, I saw a figure. It was tall and lean, wearing dark clothes, standing perfectly still. At first, I thought it was another camper, but this person didn't move, didn't wave or call out. They just stared in my direction. I didn't respond. I turned away slowly and hurried back to my camp. The feeling of being watched lingered. That night, I kept the fire burning longer and stayed extra vigilant. But nothing else happened. On the third day, things took a strange turn. I woke to find my firewood pile disturbed. Some logs had been moved or broken. There were footprints near my tent, larger than mine, going off into the forest. My heart raced. I hadn't seen anyone since the day before. The feeling of safety evaporated. I packed quickly and decided to leave. As I hiked back toward the road, I kept looking over my shoulder, hearing the crack of branches behind me. I felt eyes on me constantly, but I never saw the figure again. When I finally reached the road and got cell service, I called the local ranger station and reported what I had seen and felt. They told me there had been reports of illegal hunters and trespassers in that area recently. People who lived rough in the forest, sometimes aggressive if they felt threatened. I realized then that the figure I saw wasn't a ghost or some fantasy creature. It was a real person, someone who didn't want me there. I never went back to that spot. The experience stayed with me. Not just the fear, but the raw reminder that the wilderness, as beautiful as it is, can be unpredictable and dangerous because of other people as much as the land itself. It was the summer of 1998 when I decided to take a solo camping trip deep into the wilderness of northern Idaho. I was 27 years old, working a simple job in Spokane and looking for a break from the noise of the city. The plan was straightforward. Find a quiet spot in the Selkirk Mountains, set up camp, and spend 5 days away from everything. No phone, no people, just me and the forest. I had done a fair bit of camping before, mostly with friends or family, but this was my first solo trip. I had packed light but smart. A sturdy tent, a sleeping bag rated for cold nights, enough food for the week, a map and compass, a flashlight, and a hunting knife just in case. The area I chose was known for its thick pine forests, scattered clearings, and plenty of wildlife. The nearest town was about 30 miles away, and the dirt road I took to get there ended at a small parking lot by a trailhead. It was mid-afternoon when I parked my old Jeep and started hiking the trail. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and wet earth. The sunlight filtered through the dense branches overhead, casting a greenish glow on everything. The trail was quiet except for the distant calls of birds and the crunch of my boots on the needles and twigs. About 2 miles in, I found a perfect clearing next to a small creek. The spot was flat, surrounded by tall trees, with a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves. I unpacked my gear, pitched my tent, and gathered dry wood for a fire later that evening. The creek's water was cold and clear. I filled my bottle, then sat on a fallen log, just soaking in the silence. As the day faded into dusk, the forest around me changed. The shadows grew longer, the air cooler. I made a fire and cooked some kin stew. The flames cast a warm orange glow on the trees around me, and I felt the first true sense of being completely alone in the wild. That first night, I slept well, even though the occasional noises of animals waking nearby reminded me I was out here by myself. The distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Nothing threatening, just the forest doing what it does. The next day was mostly uneventful. I explored further along the trail, taking note of landmarks and making sure I could find my way back. The sun was bright and warm, and the forest seemed welcoming. I even saw some deer drinking from a small pond a few hundred yards from my camp. But on the third day, something started to feel off. I woke early, before sunrise, and decided to take a short walk along the creek. The air was cold and damp, and my breath came out in puffs. As I walked, I noticed broken branches and footprints in the soft soil near the water's edge. The prints were large and not human. I was no expert tracker, but they looked like they belonged to a large animal, maybe a bear. I made a mental note to be more cautious. Later that afternoon, while I was gathering firewood, I heard the snap of a branch behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The woods were still. I chalked it up to a deer or a squirrel, but the feeling that I was being watched didn't go away. That evening, as I sat by the fire reading a book, I heard a low growl not far from the edge of the clearing. My stomach tightened. I knew the area was home to black bears and wolves. I shined my flashlight into the trees, but saw nothing. I took some extra precautions that night. I hung my food in a tree away from the tent and made sure the fire was big enough to keep animals at bay. The fourth day was the worst. I woke up to find the ground around my tent disturbed, footprints and claw marks in the dirt. My food bag was torn open, some cans crushed and scattered. My heart sank. I realized whatever had been watching me was getting bolder. I packed some things quickly, deciding to cut the trip short and head back. But when I went to check my map and compass, they were gone. My stomach turned cold. I had no idea if someone was messing with my gear or if I had dropped them somewhere, but I was suddenly blind in the wilderness. I had to trust my instincts and memory. I retraced my steps toward the trailhead, moving carefully and quietly. The woods seemed darker, the shadows longer. Every snap or rustle made me freeze. I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination, but I thought I could hear footsteps behind me. The sun started to set, and I still hadn't found the trail. Panic set in. I knew I had to keep calm. I marked trees with scratches and bits of cloth torn from my shirt as I moved forward, trying to create a path I could follow if I needed to backtrack. As night fell, I realized I was lost. The forest was alive with sounds. The call of owls, the rustling of branches, the distant howl of coyotes. But somewhere in the darkness, something moved that was not a normal animal. It was slow and deliberate. I stopped walking and listened. I thought I heard breathing, steady and heavy, but not human. I grabbed my knife and backed up against a tree, feeling completely vulnerable. Hours passed. The moon rose high, casting pale light through the trees. The noises continued, footsteps circling, breaking twigs, breathing. I kept still, hoping whatever it was would lose interest. Eventually, the noises stopped. I didn't move until the first light of dawn. Then, I carefully began walking again, following the creek upstream, hoping it would lead me back to the trail. By midday, I found the dirt road where I had parked my Jeep. I was tired, hungry, and scared, but safe. That night in my truck, as I drove away, I looked back at the dark trees, feeling grateful to be leaving. I never did figure out what had followed me or disturbed my camp, but I knew it wasn't a ghost or something made up. It was real, something out there in the wild that watches and waits, and it wasn't going to be easy to forget. I was 29 when I took that trip to southern France. It was June 2014. I had been working non-stop for almost 8 years in London, never taking more than a week off. That year, I finally decided to take a long solo trip through parts of Europe. I wanted to disconnect from everything, no phone, no emails, no people. Just nature, silence, and space to think. I didn't want hostels or hotels. I wanted woods, mountains, and empty trails. I planned the route carefully. One of the areas that stood out to me was the Cévennes National Park. It's a rugged and beautiful part of France, not far from the Mediterranean, full of rocky hills, wild forests, and quiet rivers. It seemed perfect for what I had in mind. I bought a sturdy used tent, a small gas burner, a good knife, a proper backpack, and enough lightweight food to last a week or so. I carried a detailed paper map of the park too, just in case. I didn't want to rely on GPS. I drove into the park in a rented Citroen, parked near a small village called Casagnas, and started walking. It was about 2 hours before I found a nice spot on a small hill surrounded by pine trees with a little stream running about 50 meters below. I set up the tent and made camp. The air was clean. The sun was hot, but the forest kept it cool. I could hear birds and water and nothing else. That first night, I slept like a rock. I didn't even bother cooking, just ate some crackers and cheese. The forest around me was still and peaceful. I woke up at dawn, stretched, drank cold water straight from the stream, and hiked up a narrow trail that led higher into the hills. By the afternoon, I had walked maybe 15 kilometers and found another clearing higher up with a view that overlooked the valley. I stayed there for 2 nights. On the second evening, as I was packing up some things after dinner, I thought I saw someone far off on the slope across from me. It was a figure, standing near the edge of the trees, looking in my direction. I squinted, but the sun was behind them. I couldn't see clearly. Then they turned and walked back into the forest. It unsettled me a little, but not too much. I figured it was just another hiker or maybe a farmer. There are small stone huts and shepherd shelters scattered all over that region. Still, it stuck in my mind. Something about the way they had stood there, motionless, watching. By the 4th day, I had covered more ground and started looping back toward the western edge of the park. My plan was to head toward a more remote part of the forest that, according to my map, had no real trails and very little human activity. That idea seemed exciting at first. I didn't want tourist spots. I wanted pure isolation. Around noon, I found a very narrow valley between 2 ridges. The ground dipped steeply and the forest grew thicker. The trees were older here, twisted trunks and dark green moss climbing up the bark. I followed the stream into the valley, going slow, making sure I didn't lose my footing. I hadn't seen any other people all day. By late afternoon, I found a flat, dry patch of land beside the stream. There were no signs of previous camps. It was about as far off the path as I could get. I was pleased with myself. I boiled some water for rice and tuna, cleaned my pot in the stream, and zipped myself into the tent just as the sky turned orange. That night was colder. I woke up once around 2 a.m. needing to pee. I unzipped the tent quietly, stepped outside barefoot, and stood under the moonlight. It was brighter than usual, almost blue. The forest was silent. Not peaceful silent, just still. No owls, no wind. I felt a sudden chill, not from the cold, but from something else. A sense that I wasn't alone. I turned slowly and scanned the trees. I didn't see anything. Still, I hurried back inside, zipped the tent shut, and laid there wide awake for hours. The next morning, I decided to move on. I didn't like the feeling of that valley anymore. I climbed up the opposite ridge, taking my time, resting every 20 minutes. It was hot, and the trail was rough. I stopped around noon to drink water and eat. That's when I noticed something strange. I had left my small folding spade at the last campsite. I always used it to dig a shallow hole when I went to the bathroom. I was sure I had packed it. I always packed it. I checked my gear 3 times. It was gone. I knew that could just be my own mistake, but I also remembered how unsettled I had felt during the night. A weird thought crept in. What if someone had taken it while I slept? I laughed it off, but the feeling didn't go away. That night, I found another spot deeper in the woods. It was beautiful, thick soft moss on the ground, a few wildflowers, and tall trees overhead. I didn't make a fire. I didn't want light drawing attention. I just ate a cold meal, zipped myself into the tent, and kept the knife under my sleeping mat. Around 4 a.m., I woke up suddenly, not from a noise, but from a feeling like something had shifted in the air. I lay perfectly still, My heart was racing. Then I heard it. A single crack like a twig snapping. Very close. I held my breath. Another sound, soft movement in the dry leaves. Not an animal. Too slow. Too careful. Then silence again. Long silence. I don't know how long I stayed frozen. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe more. Then I reached slowly for the zipper and opened it just a few centimeters. Moonlight filtered through the trees. Everything was quiet, but something was wrong. About 10 meters away, I saw the shape of a man, standing behind a tree, not walking, not moving, just standing as if hiding but not hiding well. He was facing me. I shut the zipper quickly and slid down into my mat, heart thudding so loud I thought it would give me away. I kept my hand on the knife for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. When the sky started to lighten, I got up, packed fast, and left. I didn't even eat. I just wanted out. I didn't use the trails. I went straight downhill, following the stream, moving fast through brambles and brush. By late morning, I made it to a narrow road. I recognized it from the map. It wasn't near the village I started in, but it led toward one. I stuck out my thumb, and after 30 minutes, an old Renault stopped. The driver looked concerned but didn't say anything. I just pointed down the road and held up 2 fingers. He nodded and drove me to a small hamlet. I didn't tell anyone about the man. I don't know why. I think part of me didn't want to admit how scared I'd been. I booked a room in a tiny inn, showered, ate hot food, and locked the door 3 times that night. The next day, I drove back to Montpellier and flew home early. I didn't go camping again for a long time. When I did, it was always with friends and never in remote areas. Looking back, I think I was being watched. Not just once. I think the man had followed me from the valley. Maybe even earlier. Maybe he was the same person I saw on the ridge on the second night. I don't know what he wanted. He never spoke, never came close. But he was there. I felt him. I saw him. That's what made it so much worse. Sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that don't do anything at all because they could. Because you know they're choosing not to, and you never know why. I was 32 the year I took a solo camping trip up near June Creek in western Colorado. I'd been living in Denver for almost 6 years and was starting to feel like everything in my life was too loud. Work, the people, even the air. I needed to get away from it. Just quiet, just trees, just space. I'd camped alone before, but not often. Most of the time I went with my brother or my ex, but this time, I wanted to feel what it was like to be completely by myself. I chose June Creek because I remembered going there once with my dad when I was a teenager. I didn't know the area too well, but I remembered a particular ridge that overlooked the valley, with flat ground and plenty of pine cover. We'd stayed there one night back in 2005, and he'd said something like, "If I ever go off the grid, it's gonna be somewhere like this." I always remembered that. I drove out on a Friday morning in late September. It was cold enough that most of the summer campers had cleared out, and early enough that the hunters weren't all crowding the place. The roads turned from pavement to gravel around Sweetwater and then narrowed down to dirt trails until I had to park the truck and hike the last few miles. I packed light: tent, sleeping bag, food for 4 days, water filter, camp stove, knife, headlamp, and a bolt-action rifle just in case. Not for people, not even for bears, just for peace of mind. The trail up to the ridge wasn't marked. I had to bushwhack for a while, using GPS and my memory from that trip years ago. The sky was clear, air crisp. My legs ached halfway up, but I kept moving. Something about hiking through untouched land gave me that old familiar feeling of both being alone and watched at the same time. It wasn't paranoia, just awareness, like the land was aware of me too. I made camp around 4 p.m. The spot was just like I remembered. Soft dirt under the trees, a clean view to the west, I set up my tent near a boulder that would block some of the wind, laid out my gear, and boiled water for instant rice and tuna. As the sun dropped behind the trees, the whole place went blue and shadowed. You don't realize how loud city life is until you're out in the woods. Your ears start picking up everything. Branches snapping, birds settling in, squirrels jumping through brush. All that stuff starts to stand out. By dark, I was zipped up in my bag. No fire. I didn't want to attract attention, human or otherwise. I read a book for a while with my headlamp and eventually drifted off. Nothing happened that first night. No weird noises, no animals. Just cold wind and deep sleep. The second day, I hiked a few ridges over and followed a game trail to a spot overlooking a creek. I spent the day there, ate lunch under the sun, and tried to fish with a small travel rod I'd packed. No luck, but it was peaceful. I heard an elk bugling in the distance late in the afternoon. Sounded like a big one. When I got back to camp around dusk, something was off. It wasn't obvious. Nothing was stolen or broken. The tent was fine, gear untouched, but something had been near it. There were scuff marks in the dirt. Not boots, not hooves. Just long drag marks like someone had walked around with socks or smooth shoes. They circled the boulder and stopped just a few feet from the tent before veering off into the trees. They weren't clear tracks, just impressions. I stood there for a long time looking at them. I told myself maybe a deer had passed through and I was reading too much into it. That night, I lay in my bag with my knife beside me. I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing noises outside. Not big movements, not crashing, but small things. Crunches in the brush, quiet rustling. The kind of things that make you hold your breath so your ears can listen better. I kept my headlamp off, just watching the walls of the tent glow dimly with moonlight. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. Something moved past the tent. Slowly, just a few feet from me. I could hear breathing, not fast or panicked, but slow and shallow. That was worse. It felt calm, like whatever it was didn't care if I knew it was there. I lay there frozen for what felt like an hour. No phone service up here. No way to tell the time without turning on a light. Eventually, it moved off and I didn't hear it again. I waited until dawn before unzipping the tent. There were marks again, this time clearer. Not footprints, at least not normal ones. They were bare, wide in the front, but the heels didn't land right. Like someone had walked on the balls of their feet the whole way. And the toes were long, longer than any normal person's. They wrapped slightly like fingers. It looked wrong. That's the best way I can describe it. Like the foot wanted to be a hand. I packed my stuff. I didn't eat. I didn't stop to rest. I just broke camp and started hiking back toward the truck. About 2 hours into the hike, I got that feeling again, being watched. My back itched between the shoulder blades. My steps got faster. I didn't look behind me at first. I told myself I was being paranoid. But the woods had gone silent, and that's never a good thing. No birds, no wind, just the sound of me moving. I finally turned. First, I didn't see anything. Then I spotted it. On the ridge behind me, maybe 40 yards up. It stood half covered by trees, just still. Tall, maybe 6 feet. Naked, but its skin was mottled gray and brown, like tree bark and dried mud. I don't know if it had hair. Its arms were long, too long. They hung past its knees. It was looking at me. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it. The weight of that stare. Didn't move, didn't run, just watched. I turned and kept walking. I didn't run. I didn't want to trigger it. I just kept a steady pace, making as much ground as I could while keeping my breathing quiet. I never heard it follow, but every so often I'd look behind me and catch a glimpse of it on another ridge, another tree line. Always the same distance, always watching. The last mile to my truck felt like 100. I don't even remember the last stretch of trail. I got to the clearing, and my truck was still there, covered in a layer of dust. I threw my gear in the bed, climbed in, and didn't even take off my boots before turning the ignition. I drove until I hit pavement, then another 2 hours back to Glenwood Springs, where I got a motel room and sat in the shower for 30 minutes just letting the water run cold. I didn't sleep that night either. I kept thinking about that thing, about its face, or lack of one, the way it didn't chase me. That was the worst part. It wasn't hunting. It was studying. I never reported anything. What would I even say? I didn't tell friends. Not right away. I didn't even tell my brother until last year. He asked why I never went camping anymore. I said I got sick of it. But that's not the truth. The truth is I know something lives up in those woods. It's not a bear. It's not a man. It's something in between. Something old. Something that doesn't need to attack you to make its point. It just needs to remind you that out there, you're the outsider. I've gone on hikes since then, but never alone. Never off trail. And never ever back to June Creek. That ridge, my dad was right. It's a perfect place to disappear. But not because you go off-grid, because something else makes sure you never come back.